Welcome to the very first episode of the Business Tools for Home Builders podcast. My name is Matt, and today I'm going to explore the various subcontractor documents that I encourage you to keep on file. Get up to date now so you don't create a mess for yourself later. The reason why we want to go into this, there's three main reasons. One is IRS tax compliance. You want to make sure that you're filing those 1099 NECs on time each year by the end of January. Two, your state level deduction that you can receive for paying subcontractors. That's a really good thing you don't want to miss. Keeping up with these documents and staying current with your accounting can be very key to making sure that you receive that deduction from the state. And then three, your insurance compliance audits. You don't want to create a big mess for yourself when it comes time to prepare for those auditors. So let's go ahead and take a quick look at the Tennessee Business Tax Guide. And I wanted to specify this section where it goes into talking about the deduction you can receive on your business tax returns at the state level. So if we take a look at this, this is actually the Tennessee Business Tax Guide that was released this March. They periodically update these. I like to keep a copy on file, but I also like to check back to see if they've updated them periodically. So this is the latest one that I've just opened up. In Section 5 regarding subcontractor payments, contractors may deduct from their business tax base amounts actually paid during the business tax period to a subcontractor that holds a business license or who is licensed by the State Board for Licensing Contractors for performing the activities described in the Tennessee Code annotated section. So in other words, if your subs have performed any of these services listed here, constructing, building, erecting, repairing, grading, pretty much building a house. If they've helped you build a house, you can likely deduct the payments you paid them during the tax year as a direct deduction from the amounts you have to report and pay gross receipts tax on. So that's very helpful. The document you need for that they're going to want to see proof that you've been keeping track of these business licenses from your sub is the actual business license or the contractor license, which I'll get into in just a second. So that's a really good thing for you to keep track of so that when you go to file your gross receipts or business taxes in the state of Tennessee, that you can get that legitimate subcontractor deduction and put that money back into your pocket. So let's go through the documents specifically related to subcontractors. The first one is your document you're responsible for, and that's the Form 1099 NEC. This is the document that you or your accountant's going to file for you at the end of the year, remit to both the subcontractor and the IRS. This is an informational return. This is basically telling the sub and telling the IRS, these are the amounts that I paid during this tax period to this non-employee. So let's talk about that for just a second. You mean to tell me I need to pay my drone photographer? I don't know, just the first thing that came to mind. I pay this person $600 a time to come to a location and do some drone footage of the progress on the build. Well, if that person's not a corporation and they're a worker, they're working on your behalf and they're not an employee, they're not a corporation, that's a non-employee worker receiving non-employee compensation. If that's $600 or more in the tax year, you want to make sure that you're filing the 1099 NEC for compliance purposes. So this is a copy of that 1099 form. So you'd obviously fill in your information here, your taxpayer identification number, the recipient's taxpayer identification number, and this we'll already get into why it's important to have that Form W-9 and on file from the subcontractor because you need to have their taxpayer identification number, the recipient's name, etc., address, and then very importantly, probably the two most important boxes here are the recipient's TIN, and then number one, box one, the non-employee compensation paid during that year. So of course, you'll want to be able to report this out of your accounting system. So it's really important that you have that contact set up in there. You have their, your TIN, your W-9 information on file for that person. You can actually quickly report the total amount that you paid them for the year as well. And then you report that in box one. So I don't commonly see any federal income taxes withheld. We won't get into that in this video. We can do a deep dive into the 1099 in a later video. But if you're subject to requiring backup withholdings for that sub because they haven't provided their TIN or there's a TIN mismatch, something like that, We'll get into that at a later time. But for now, that's the basics of the Form 1099, which is your form you're responsible for. Now, next, we'll talk about the 3 forms that you want to make sure that you're requesting from your subcontractors. I highly recommend that you request these documents before the very first nail is driven in, the very first hammer is picked up, etc., so to speak. Just so you know that you have these on file. And I certainly wouldn't want to pay these subs until you have these 3 documents on file. The first one being the Form W-9, the next being that business license or contractor's license that we just saw in the business tax guide here, section 5. You want to, you can get this deduction for subs that you hold a business license for, or who's licensed by the State Board of Licensing Contractors. So you want to make sure you have either the business license from that subcontractor or their contractor's license. And then third, and no less or more important, the certificate of insurance documenting general liability insurance and workers' compensation insurance. Or you can also receive their workers' comp exemption if they're exempt from workers' compensation insurance. So first of all, let's dive into the Form W-9. I won't go too deep on this. There's quite a bit we can get into. The most important thing here that I would say is this is probably, you've seen these documents so many times, but I want to just recommend that you kind of second guess what you're looking at. Make sure it's all completely filled in accurately so that you know that what you're reporting on that 1099 is also accurate. So notice in box 1 here, name as shown on your income tax return. So that's very important. And then 2, business name. I think people get a little overwhelmed when they're filling these out and they don't take the time to understand what this means. So I find some guys in the field, they may be operating under a DBA or doing business as name that's not even registered. The state of Tennessee actually doesn't even recognize DBAs. Of course, this is a federal document, so it's using federal language. So the state of Tennessee recognizes assumed names, which that's great. But here I'm thinking more in lines of, say, Joe Smith, that's his name, but he's, I'm just going off the top of my head, say he operates as Do Good Plumbing, but that's not actually registered by the state. That's not technically a real entity. If he put in box 1, Do Good Plumbing, that's not the name as shown on the tax return. He'd want to put, actually, in fact, on his 1040, it's probably Joseph R. Smith. That's what he should put in line 1. And then he could put in line 2 the business name or disregarded entity name if different from above. But for the purposes of our 1099, we'd be using that box 1 name in that example. And then check the appropriate box for the entity type of this individual. The fact pattern I just described was a sole proprietor. He hasn't registered an actual business. So he's operating as himself, even if he's using the name Do Good Plumbing. That's this checkbox here. He's an individual or sole proprietor. If he had in fact registered Do Good Plumbing LLC, then it would be the same thing here too if it's a single member LLC, meaning that he registered with the state saying that there's only one member, Joe. He'd also select that box. The others are fairly self-explanatory. The C corporation, that's someone who's registered as a corporation, C corporation. S corporation, that's a little bit trickier because an LLC could take that subchapter S election, so that would be an S corporation. Or if you're a C corporation with the S election selected as well, you would select S corporation. Partnership, so careful with this one. A general partnership, you would select this checkbox, meaning, hey, we're just a general partnership. Joe and Dave operate together as a general partnership. Now, if they have a 2-member LLC, a limited liability company that they've registered in the state of Tennessee with 2 members, that's actually this box down here, limited liability company. And then you would put the P there for partnership in this example I just made up. Joe and Steve Do Good Plumbing LLC, they've registered with 2 members. They are a partnership, so you would select this box and then enter the key P for partnership there. Again, I see this filled out incorrectly all the time. We do the best we can with what we receive. Sometimes I practice professional skepticism and look up a little information with the state with them and see if I can actually file more accurately than the W-9 received. So just keep an eye out for those types of things. It's very easy to go sideways on these, and especially on part 1 here. So the rest of this is pretty self-explanatory. The address, city, state, zip, etc., related to that name in box 1. Now part 1, this gets pretty tricky here pretty quickly. I see this done incorrectly all the time. And so much so that even though this is a brief intro to these documents and managing subcontractors, I actually want to take the time to look at the instructions on this form. Wow, Form W-9, who thought that we could spend 10 minutes on it, but here we are. So we want to include the taxpayer identification number, okay? And the example of the sole proprietor, I think his name was Joe Smith that I made up for Do Good Plumbing. He's a sole proprietor. He selected this box. He entered on line 1, Joseph R. Smith is his name, Do Good Plumbing. All right, so that's all good. We put his address in here. And for Joe, he's going to operate under the Social Security number, period. Not a whole lot to that. Of course, I'm just making this up, but that would be his accurate Social Security number he would use as his taxpayer identification number. What I see happen time and time again, though. So say Joseph R. Smith, let's change this around a little bit, just a little bit. He has registered with the Tennessee Secretary of State as a single member LLC. Okay? His name is still Joseph R. Smith. His business name or disregard. So, okay, let me back up here. If you've registered a single member LLC with the state of Tennessee, in the eyes of the IRS, that is what's known as a disregarded entity. Notice here, line 1, name, as shown on your income tax return. This is correct. Business name / disregarded entity name, if different from above. Do Good Plumbing, LLC. That's his disregarded entity name. And we'd still check this box because he's now a single member LLC. That's the correct box to check for that. All right, again, address, that's fine. Now, let's read this. Introduction to part 1. Enter your TIN in the appropriate box. The TIN provided must match the name given on line 1 to avoid backup withholdings. For individuals, this is generally your Social Security number. However, for a resident alien, sole proprietor, or a disregarded entity, see the instructions for part 1 later. Okay, so Joseph R. Smith, Do Good Plumbing, LLC. He is a disregarded entity. So let's look at the instructions for part 1. And they're on down here a bit. All right, enter your TIN. Here we go. If you are a sole proprietor and you have an EIN, you may enter either your Social Security number or EIN, but we can't stop there. If you are a single member LLC that is disregarded as an entity separate from its owner, enter the owner's Social Security number or EIN if the owner has one. Okay, don't stop there. Do not enter the disregarded entity's EIN. I'll say that again. Do not enter the disregarded entity's EIN. So I'm Joe. I set up my LLC, which is my disregarded entity, and then I went to the IRS to register an EIN because I either wanted to open a bank account, the bank required it, or maybe I'm hiring. I wanted to start up payroll and I needed to have an employer identification number to start payroll. That's the EIN of the disregarded entity, not of the individual. So again, if you're a single member LLC that is disregarded as an entity separate from its owner, enter the owner's Social Security number or the EIN of the owner if the owner has one. Do not enter the disregarded entity's EIN. And then, of course, if the LLC is classified as a corporation or a partnership, enter the EIN. So that's a little bit different there. So if Joseph and Steve have that LLC 2-member partnership, then of course they're not going to use Joseph's or Steve's social security number. They're going to use that LLC partnership's EIN. Same with the general partnership. They would register and use that EIN of that partnership. Okay, so this is, I see this wrong all the time. I'll have a business, so say it's Joseph R. Smith, Do Good Plumbing LLC. I'll see in line 1, Do Good Plumbing. They'll may or may not even check that box, and then they'll slap their the disregarded entity's EIN in this box. Okay, you know, you're signing. That's the next line here, part 2. You're certifying that this information's accurate, and you know, basically that everything you've included is correct, and you fill out this form correctly, and you've dated that. So that's really, you know, if I'm managing these documents for a home builder, it's really on, this is really the sub's responsibilities, but there are a couple of things, you know, today it's been a little bit tricky. I've seen some news articles. It's hard to find really good subs, keep really good subs, have people just show up when they said they're going to show up, or even answer your calls. So we really want to nurture those relationships. And one thing we can do to give back to these subs is just educate them on how to run better businesses themselves. We want to build stronger businesses. We're all about continuous improvement in our businesses, but we want to help our subs too. And little things like this can go a long way. Hey, can I help you fill out this W-9? Looks like this was signed in 2019. Let's go ahead and update this. And by the way, here are a couple of things that you can make this better. Or just send them a link to this video too. It might help them out as well. So that's really the W-9. This is the most extensive. I'm going to go into this document. Pretty much the nuts and bolts of what I want to show you is that if you're a disregarded entity, put your name as it's shown on your Form 1040 page 1 here, and then put your disregarded entity name here. You're going to check that box, and then you're going to use your Social Security there, unless you, the actual person, has an EIN related to you as the owner. Then you'd use that EIN. But as in the instructions state, down here, do not enter the disregarded entity's EIN. That's a little problematic. And really what's happening here, the mechanics of this, the IRS is going to receive that Form 1099 from you. You're going to report the TIN of the payee or the recipient of that money. The IRS's computer is trying to match that to a tax return. There's no tax return filed for a disregarded entity. That's Schedule C of the person's Form 1040. There's no actual tax return. So the computer needs to tie to that taxpayer's tax return, which would be that Form 1040. The TIN associated with that Form 1040 is that person's Social Security number. So when you report the 1099 with the recipient's Social Security number, the computer can match that to that Form 1040, that individual tax return of that owner, and then they can see that that owner also reported that same dollar amount for their 1099 related to their Schedule C business, and it's a match. It's good. And then there's no kick out. There's no unnecessary letters from the IRS. There's no trying to get on the phone with them because you just can't. That's not possible to get on the phone with the IRS right now. They're so backed up. You want to avoid any of that. Get these documents from your subs the best you can. Then that empowers you to fill out the Form 1099s and be compliant once that time rolls around. All right, enough about that one. I'll probably do a much deeper dive on that topic in the future. Next up, I've pulled up a redacted business license and a contractor license. So happens to be a Williamson County license. Just to give you an idea of what that looks like, pretty much here it is. So again, if I receive an invoice from one of my builders, subcontractors, and I don't have these documents on file, I'll automatically reach out to them and ask them for their Form W-9, their business license, their COI showing general liability and workers' comp. If they don't have workers' comp COI, I want that workers' comp exemption from them. So here's an example of a Williamson County business license that I want to see. It's going to name the business name, Do Good Plumbing, the address, the date issued, the classification number for that person is probably going to be 3 or 4. The letter ID, I don't really care about that. The license number I do care about because I'm going to have to report that back for my business tax return. Expiry date, I don't want an expired business license from that person. I want you to send me your current business license. I want to show you I want you to show me that you're current and legitimate in the state of Tennessee before we commence work together. It's really important because, again, when I file that business tax return or gross receipts, that's what it used to be called, the gross receipts return at the end of the year, I'm going to have to compile the names of all my subs I paid, the amounts paid to them, what type of work they completed on my behalf, their license number, so that I can claim that deduction on that business tax return. Similarly, I can report on that business tax return the Licensed Board of Contractors license. So here's an example of a home improvement contractor. It'd have their ID number. I need to know that number. Also, again, I don't want I don't want something that you had from 5 years ago and maybe you've gone inactive for whatever reason. I want to know that you're active and you're legitimate in the state before working. Because I want to be working with subs that, we have a relationship and we're on the up and up and we're doing good work together. That's the ethos that I would recommend. Great, enough about that. So we've gone over the 1099, the W-9 from the subcontractor, the business license or contractor's license from the subcontractor. And last up is the COI, or the Certificate of Insurance. This is the industry standard form. Again, you're probably, when you see these, you may glaze over when you see them because you see so many of them. But it's really important to see a couple of, to check out a couple of things, some things I see missed quite frequently. So the producer would be the insurance brokerage or whoever insurance provider is covering the insured. The insured would be your subcontractor, so Do Good Plumbing, his address and everything. The agent's contact, the insurance agent's contact information, that's helpful to have up here. Say one has expired, so one of these COIs has expired and you want to renew it. Maybe you've tried to reach out to the sub, they didn't get back to you on it, but you can reach out to the agent directly. That's pretty helpful to have their phone or their email address there. That's very helpful. So in the body of this COI, what we want to see when I'm looking at these, I want to make sure that they have general liability coverage and workers' compensation and coverage. Everything else is great too. Sometimes I ask for that and I specify I need a certificate of insurance presenting general liability coverage and workers' comp coverage. And so I might get one back and they just have umbrella. Well, that's not going to work. I'm going to end up pinging them again because I need what I asked for, quite frankly. So I want to see that this general liability is filled out. I'll keep this brief here. We can go in a deep dive later. So general liability, I want to see the effective date and the expiry date. I want to make sure that the expiry date falls after the point at which I'm going to make payment to this subcontractor. So say, for example, I'm paying them today. Today's August 19th. If this expired on August 16th, I'm going to withhold that payment until I get the renewal of their GL insurance, the general liability insurance COI. So again, I want to see an effective date and I want to see a policy expiry date. I want that expiry date to fall after the date at which I'm going to pay that subcontractor. Same thing for workers' compensation. We want to show that they have workers' compensation. We want to make sure that that expiry date falls after the date of payment. Okay, that's not it. We're not done. So GL, we want an expiry date we want a GL that's not expired, quite frankly. We want a COI for workers' comp that's not expired. If they can't present that, we want to see their workers' comp exemption issued by the state. And on that workers' comp exemption, I didn't pull one of those up, but I want to see that that's current and not expired. That's great. This is an easy thing to miss. Make sure that you're listed as the certificate holder. You'll want to have your business name and your business's domiciled address, the address at which your business is domiciled, your headquarters or what have you. For most builders, you're working at the job site, so whatever is your kind of registered address for your business, where all your mail goes to, where you sort of operate the business out of, where your checks go to, etc. So it's very easy. Some subs I've seen, even they'll put their COI out on their website for you to go retrieve. Well, that's not going to be custom to you. I want to be named, don't you? So if anything were going to happen on the job site, is it enough that they're covered, or are they covered, and is it documented that you're the actual certificate holder? That just feels a lot more intentional than just receiving just a blanket COI without your name, your business name listed here. And that'll wrap up the very first episode of the Business Tools for Home Builders podcast. My name is Matt Evers. I'm a CPA here in Nashville, Tennessee. I operate the firm Evers CPA. We specialize in working with custom home builders. We're dedicated to that, and we give a very close personal relationship to our builders. It's the work that we love doing. We love keeping up with your subcontractor information, making sure that you're compliant with the IRS, keeping your customers happy and keeping your jobs progressively billed, making sure those job costs are billed to the correct job so that we don't tick your customers off by including Franklin charges for that Gallatin build going on. So we want to keep everything organized for you. That's what we do. That's what we specialize in. We've got a lot of expertise in this area. I look forward to producing more content like this for you. So if you have any ideas, shoot them my way. If you found it valuable, subscribe to the channel. If you think someone else might find value, share this with a friend. And I look forward to the next one. We'll see you soon.